Definitions, images and words, words and images. Definitions are an important and integral part to any argument and advocacy position. If you go back to Saving Nature for Only Man, we talked about the differences between luxury and necessity, sane environmentalism, the Gaia theory, and things of that sort. We create definitions in our papers and in our arguments so everyone has a clear idea of what we're talking about and advocating for. So if you close your eyes and I ask you to envision a tree, we're not all going to envision the same tree. Some people are going to think of palms, others of maple, others of a coniferous. However, if I ask you to think of a tree, and I say, I want you to think of a palm tree with sand around it, coconuts hanging from it, and maybe ocean waves lapping up against it. We might not have the same exact image, but we have a much closer image to what this tree is. And this is what happens with definitions. You're bringing your reader in to specifically see what you're talking about from a certain angle. So it ensures that the audience is on the same page as you and each other. So if you look at the Some Like It Hot essay by Lawrence Lessing, starting on page 88, he talks about piracy. And right from the beginning, he really kind of defines this broad sense of piracy. So we have an idea that the remaining portion of the essay is going to talk about piracy from different angles, from this broad overarching view. And so we don't need to define everything when we define something, right? Like Lawrence Lessing doesn't need to define Hollywood film, and he doesn't need to define the record industry. He doesn't need those things. But his entire paper is about piracy, so he needs to really define what he's talking about so we all have an idea. But we also need to define things that have more than one meaning. And I think that Lessing does a really great job in this paper. What he does is he starts off as piracy as this overarching figure, and then he looks at the different ways that piracy is used, broken, and established through film, through the recording industry, and through the cable industry. And he weaves this definition and looks at how it changes in these different industries until we get to the very end when he talks about the modern era of person-to-person file sharing and where does that interact with piracy. And so for him, it was really important to initially establish this definition so we can trace it throughout the remainder of his essay. Going back to Saving Nature for Man, if you'll remember that the author had to define the Gaia theory, and he did that because not everyone is going to be familiar with a theory or with something maybe a little more obscure. So for reasons like that, you would also want to define something. Definitions typically go in several different places. So for the Lawrence Lessig piece, because he's establishing what he talks about from the beginning, usually your definition will go there if it's an overarching definition. However, going back to the Saving Nature but Just for Man, every time he introduced something that the reader may not be familiar with, there was a short explanation or definition right after it. So there's two ways that definitions can work in your paper. So how do you know something needs to be defined? I mean, how do you know if your reader, doesn't know what this term is or this definition is? Well, a good key is first, is it a key term, right? So everyone knows what poverty means. We don't really need to break that down. However, if we're talking about, let's say, gun control, well, we have to define what guns we're talking about. Are we talking about handguns? Are we talking about assault rifles? Are we talking about grenade launchers? Are we talking about shotguns? What are we talking about? So for something like that, you would really want to define it. Also, if you're reading something from an outside reader, let's say, and you come across a word that's really technical or confusing, that would be another time to define something. You can use your judgment on this. So often we have to adapt a definition from someone else. We don't want to just create our own definition because we're not really in a position to do that as we're still students that are learning. So for something like this, you'd want to go out and research a good definition that would work for your paper or your position. However, realize that not all definitions are created equal, just as all dictionaries are not created equal. This would be a good time to become familiar with the resource section in the library. It's on the first floor, right behind the reference desk. If you do find a definition, however, that's full of technical jargon or whatnot, steer clear from a definition like that and find a more user-friendly one. You want one that really explains what you're talking about, not confuses the reader even more. Definitions should also be objective. So if we're talking about the abortion debate and you're using terms like baby versus fetus, you want something that's going to be more objective. Or if you're talking about gun control, if you're talking about assault rifles versus deadly killing machines, you want to keep a more generic kind of term and definition in there so you're not sweeting your reader from the beginning. You also want to make sure that your definitions are the same throughout the paper. Once you establish what something is, you really don't want to all of a sudden start using it to mean something different. That would really throw your reader off the basis and also really weaken your argument. What I'd like you to do now is you've picked a topic and you've begun to think about maybe what you're going to be doing with this topic and how you're going to argue and advocate for this. What I want you to do is take about 10 minutes and brainstorm the answer to these questions. So, overarchingly, what's your topic about? Mine's about knitting at bus stops. Okay, got it. So what are some angles I can take to explore this topic? Like, what are some out-of-the-box ideas? How would I implement something like this and advocate it? And then what are some of the key terms that I might need to define or explore? Now, this is important because these can also help you as you start to research, as you start to put in your key terms, right? Define articles and research materials. And note that this will get longer before it gets shorter, but it's really important to kind of start broad and then narrow down. So a good technique right now would be maybe to do a cluster or a spider web where you have your topic on the inside with branching key terms and definitions on the outside that you can begin to look up and explore. Make sure that you bring these to class because these are things that we'll continue to work on and throughout the remainder of the unit. All right, I'll see you all on Wednesday.